Look at me, Nolan. If you are going to imprison an innocent woman, at least look at her first. Laurel Bennett stood beneath the iron archway of North Tower, her wrists free, her shoulders straight, while two royal officers waited beside the open door. Alpha King Nolan Ashford stood 6 feet away, yet he could not meet the eyes of the Omega he had rejected less than an hour earlier. Beyond the stone walls, winter rain swept across West Haven, turning the palace courtyard silver beneath the lamps. Laurel, Nolan said quietly, do not make this harder. I am not the one making it hard. 6 hours earlier, she had entered the council chamber believing she had been summoned to discuss medical supply accounts. Instead, Chancellor Silas Crowell had placed a sealed evidence folder before the king. The confidential Winter Treaty ledger had disappeared from the royal archive. A copied section had been discovered inside Laurel's room. Worse, the archive records showed her personal access seal had opened the restricted chamber shortly after midnight. Nolan had stared at the documents as though they belonged to another world. Tell me you did not betray West Haven. Laurel had looked directly at him. I did not. Then explain why the treaty was in your room. I cannot explain something I did not put there. Silas had remained beside the council table, calm and sympathetic. Your Majesty, the evidence has been independently logged. Laurel turned toward him. Independently by whose office? Silas did not answer immediately. That hesitation told her more than his words. 3 days earlier, she had submitted an inquiry concerning missing medical supplies. Cedar Hollow Clinic had supposedly received 40 cases according to Crown invoices. The clinic confirmed only 23. Thousands of dollars had disappeared between payment and delivery. Silas had requested the inquiry personally. Now Laurel understood why. Before the officers arrived, he found her alone outside the chamber. There may still be a merciful resolution, he said. Withdraw your questions about the medical accounts. Admit you mishandled restricted treaty material, and I will recommend leniency. Laurel stared at him. You want me to confess to something I did not do. I want you to consider what pride will cost you. No, something cold entered his expression. Then I hope your principles keep you warm in North Tower. Minutes later, Nolan summoned her back before the council. Silas argued that Laurel's bond to the king made ordinary detention politically impossible unless Nolan formally rejected her first. Laurel waited for Nolan to challenge him. He did not. Laurel Bennett, Nolan said, his voice strained. Until this investigation establishes the truth, I cannot recognize you as my future Luna. Her heart seemed to stop, but she refused to let the room watch it break. You mean you reject me? Nolan's silence answered. Then came the order for temporary detention. Now, beneath North Tower, Laurel watched the man she had trusted stand beneath the rain. One day, she said, you are going to learn who put that treaty in my room. Nolan finally looked at her. Regret was already visible in his face, but regret was not trust. If you are innocent, I will find the truth. I am innocent. Then I will come for you myself. Laurel glanced toward the open doorway behind her. No, Nolan. Her voice softened, which somehow made the words heavier. If that day comes, you will already be too late. She walked inside without being touched or pushed. The officer waited for Nolan's final authorization. For 1 second, he could still stop everything. Nolan looked at Laurel. Laurel looked back. Close it, he said. The heavy door swung inward. Just before it shut, Laurel saw Silas standing beneath the covered walkway across the courtyard, watching. He was not surprised. He was not relieved. He was smiling. For 36 hours, Laurel Bennett did not ask Nolan to free her. That frightened him more than begging would have. North Tower was not a dungeon. Her room was clean, heated, and furnished with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the winter hills beyond West Haven. Yet every meal arrived through a guarded door. Every visitor required authorization, and every evening ended with the unmistakable sound of a lock turning between her and the world. Outside, Nolan came shortly after sunrise on the second morning. Laurel was sitting beside the window reading a book she had borrowed from the Tower Library. She did not stand when he entered. Silas says you refused another interview. I answered his questions yesterday. He believes you are protecting someone. Laurel closed the book. And what do you believe? Nolan hesitated. I believe there are things you are not telling me. There are. His expression sharpened. Then tell me. I submitted a medical supply inquiry 3 days before the treaty appeared in my room. Silas asked me to withdraw it. When I refused, He offered me leniency if I confessed. Nolan stared at her. Why did you not say this before? I tried. Your counsel called it an attempt to redirect suspicion. You should have told me privately. Laurel almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. When? Before or after you rejected me? Nolan looked away. She rose slowly. You came here because you want something from me. I want the truth. You already have mine. Laurel. No. You want a version of the truth that makes the evidence and the woman you knew fit inside the same story. Nolan stepped closer to the desk. Give me one reason to believe you. Her face changed then. Not with anger. Something quieter. I already gave you one. Nolan said nothing. My word. The silence between them felt colder than the glass beside her. Nolan had known Laurel for 3 years. He knew she returned extra change when a merchant made a mistake. He knew she stayed late in the medical archive because rural clinics depended on accurate shipments. He knew she hated court politics because, as she once told him, hungry families did not care which counselor received credit for feeding them. Yet he had still looked at a copied treaty and an access record and decided those things mattered more than everything he knew. If Silas threatened you, I will investigate it. Do that for West Haven, Laurel said. Not for me. Nolan moved toward the door, then stopped. I never wanted you here. Laurel looked at the lock. And yet here I am. He left without answering. Less than an hour later, Silas entered Nolan's office carrying another sealed report. His face was grave. We have a serious development. Nolan took the paper. A confidential clause from the Winter Treaty had reached an outside broker before dawn. It concerned a trade concession known only to 6 counselors, Nolan and the treaty archive. When was this transmitted? Nolan asked. Approximately 3 this morning. His eyes lifted slowly. Laurel has been locked inside North Tower since yesterday afternoon. Which suggests an accomplice, Silas replied immediately. Too immediately. Nolan studied him. You sound certain. The alternative is that our security records are unreliable. Are they? Silas paused. There is no reason to believe so. Nolan looked again at the report. The first leak had condemned Laurel because her seal appeared in the archive. The second had happened while she was behind a locked door with no access to treaty records. Silas continued speaking about accomplices, hidden networks, and the danger of releasing her too soon. Nolan barely heard him. One sentence from Laurel kept returning instead. My word. I want an independent audit of every archive access record from the last 7 days, Nolan said. Silas became still. My office has already reviewed them. That is why I said independent. Nolan reached for the telephone on his desk. Send Adrian Pike from Crown Records to me immediately. For the first time since Laurel entered North Tower, Silas Crowell did not have an answer ready. And for the first time, Nolan noticed. Adrian Pike found the first impossible detail before noon. He stood in the Crown Records office with 3 security logs spread across the table while Nolan watched from the opposite side. Laurel's seal entered the treaty archive at 12:14 in the morning, Adrian said. That is what Silas showed the council. And the central system received the entry at 12:25. Nolan frowned. 11 minutes later. Archive seals register instantly. There should be no delay. Adrian placed another sheet beside it. Someone imported this record after the original system cycle. Nolan felt his stomach tighten. Can you prove that? I can prove the timestamp was added differently from every legitimate entry that night. The office door opened before Nolan could respond. Silas entered without waiting to be invited. Your Majesty, I was informed Crown Records was reviewing security evidence. Adrian looked at him. Independently. Silas ignored the emphasis. The system experienced maintenance interruptions last month. Delayed synchronization is possible. Not according to the maintenance report, Adrian said. There was no interruption that night. Silas remained composed. Then continue investigating. He turned toward Nolan. But one technical irregularity does not erase the treaty copy found in Laurel's room. No, Nolan said. It does not. Silas left, but Nolan noticed how carefully he closed the door. Adrian waited several seconds before speaking again. There is something else. I requested Laurel's movement records from the night of the first leak. And Royal Security sent me nothing. Nolan's eyes hardened. Why? They said the medical wing logs were irrelevant. 20 minutes later, Nolan and Adrian entered the palace medical wing. Dr. Miriam Cole met them outside the pediatric recovery room. She listened to Nolan's question, then stared at him in disbelief. You are asking where Laurel was between midnight and 1? Yes. Here. Nolan stopped breathing for a moment. Miriam walked to the nurse's station and opened the handwritten overnight register. A palace groundskeeper brought his 8-year-old daughter in with a dangerously high fever. We were short-staffed. Laurel was delivering inventory records and stayed to help calm the child while I treated her. Adrian leaned toward the register. What time did Laurel arrive? 11:53. When did she leave? 12:48. Nolan looked at the entry. Laurel Bennett. Her signature sat beneath Miriam's. 2 nurses had countersigned the same page. Could she have left during that period? Nolan asked. Miriam's expression cooled. I was in the room with her. Adrian spoke quietly. The treaty archive is nearly half a mile across the palace grounds. Miriam nodded. Then she could not have been there at 12:14. Nolan stared at Laurel's signature. Did security interview you? No. Did anyone request this register? Miriam hesitated. Yes. Chancellor Crowell's office requested a copy the morning Laurel was accused. The room seemed to narrow around Nolan. Silas saw this. His deputy signed for it. Adrian immediately checked the document routing record. His face changed. The copy reached the Chancellor's office 3 hours before the council hearing. Nolan heard Laurel's voice as clearly as if she were beside him. I already gave you one. My word. The proof had existed before he rejected her. Before he authorized detention. Before North Tower closed. Someone had possessed evidence that could have stopped everything and had kept it outside the council packet. Nolan turned toward Adrian. Can an access seal be duplicated? Not easily. That was not my question. Adrian held his gaze. Yes. Nolan was already moving. He crossed the palace courtyard without waiting for a car, winter wind cutting through his coat as North Tower rose ahead. The officer at the entrance straightened when he saw him. Open Laurel Bennett's room. The officer hesitated. Your Majesty. Now. I cannot. Nolan stopped. You cannot. The officer swallowed. Miss Bennett is no longer here. For one terrible second, Nolan thought Silas had moved her. Where is she? The High Magistrate reviewed the detention evidence this morning. Crown Records sent notice of inconsistencies. The magistrate ordered her immediate release. Nolan stared at the closed door. When the officer lowered his eyes. 3 hours ago, Nolan had finally found the proof that Laurel was innocent. He had simply found it 3 hours too late. The room Laurel left behind was almost perfectly empty. Nolan stood inside North Tower while the officer remained near the doorway, uncertain whether the king wanted answers or silence. The narrow bed had been made. The borrowed book rested neatly on the desk. A cup of untouched tea had gone cold beside it. Nothing suggested panic. Nothing suggested escape. Laurel had simply been given back her freedom and walked away. Did she say where she was going? Nolan asked. No, Your Majesty. Did anyone meet her? Not that I saw. The officer hesitated. She asked for paper before she left. Nolan turned. Where is it? The High Magistrate received her statement. She left something else here. The officer opened the desk drawer and removed a small velvet pouch. Nolan recognized it before it touched his hand. Inside lay the silver pendant he had given Laurel the night he asked her to become his future Luna. She had worn it beneath her collar almost every day since. Now it felt impossibly cold against his palm. Beneath the pouch was a copy of her statement. Nolan read the final line twice. I was innocent before they proved it. No accusation followed. None was necessary. He had demanded evidence before offering trust to the woman he claimed to love, and when the evidence finally came, she no longer needed him to open the door. Your Majesty? Nolan folded the paper carefully. Find Adrian Pike. Tell him every record connected to Laurel's detention is now under independent preservation. No document is altered, removed, or destroyed. Yes, Your Majesty. Nolan returned to the palace and found Adrian waiting outside Crown Records with another discovery. We traced the medical wing register request, Adrian said. The Chancellor's deputy collected it, but the authorization came directly from Silas Crowell. Nolan's jaw tightened. So he knew Laurel had an alibi. Before the hearing, and still presented her as the only viable suspect. Adrian nodded. There is more. I reviewed the medical supply inquiry Laurel mentioned. They entered the records room, where invoices covered a long oak table. Adrian pointed to Cedar Hollow Clinic. Crown accounts show 40 supply cases delivered last month. Laurel said they received 23. She was right. Adrian placed the clinic confirmation beside the invoice. 17 cases existed on paper, but never arrived. Nolan scanned the payment records. Where did the money go? Through 2 distribution contractors. Both connect to holding companies represented by the same financial agent. Who? Adrian slid another document toward him. Nolan read the name and felt the pattern tightening. The agent had served Silas for 11 years. Laurel found this before the treaty disappeared. 3 days before, Adrian confirmed. Her inquiry requested a full audit of 6 rural clinics. If approved, it would have exposed similar discrepancies. Nolan looked toward the palace windows. Laurel had not been framed because she was weak. She had been framed because she noticed something powerful people needed hidden. The door opened. Silas entered with his usual composure. Your Majesty, I understand Laurel Bennett has been released. Given the continuing treaty leak, I strongly recommend an emergency order restricting her travel until we identify her accomplice. Nolan slowly turned. Her accomplice? The second leak proves she did not act alone. Or it proves she never acted at all. For the first time, Silas did not answer immediately. Nolan placed the medical register on the table. You had this before the hearing. Silas glanced at it. An alibi for one moment does not establish innocence. It establishes she was half a mile away when her seal supposedly opened the archive. Then someone may have used it for her. Exactly. Silas realized his mistake a second too late. Nolan stepped closer, his voice quiet. You just argued the possibility your own investigation refused to consider. Silas recovered quickly. I considered every possibility necessary to protect West Haven, including Laurel's medical inquiry. The chancellor's expression changed by less than a breath, but Nolan saw it. Adrian placed the Cedar Hollow invoices beside the security logs. We are auditing all 6 clinics. Silas looked at him, then back at Nolan. Be careful what you imply. Nolan closed his hand around Laurel's pendant. I am finished implying. He ordered Silas's office records preserved and removed royal security from the investigation pending independent review. Silas left without another word. Only after the door closed did Adrian speak. Do you think he framed her? Nolan looked at the pendant in his palm. I think Laurel discovered something 3 days before someone destroyed her name. Outside, bells marked the afternoon hour. Somewhere beyond West Haven, Laurel was free. Nolan should have felt relief. Instead, he finally understood what she had meant at North Tower. Freedom had arrived. Truth was arriving. But neither had come from him. By sunset, Adrian Pike had found enough missing medicine to fill 3 rural clinics for a month. The numbers repeated across 6 districts with almost insulting precision. Crown invoices listed full deliveries. Clinic receipts showed smaller shipments. The difference disappeared through contractors connected to holding companies that had no warehouses, no drivers, and almost no employees. Nolan stood at the end of the records table as Adrian arranged the documents by date. How long? Nolan asked. At least 14 months. How much money? Enough that someone expected nobody to compare the invoices with the clinics. Nolan looked at Cedar Hollow's records. Laurel had compared them. That simple act had placed her directly in Silas Crowell's path. Adrian opened another folder. I also found the authorization used to duplicate Laurel's archive seal. Nolan's eyes lifted. Duplicated. Royal security can create temporary copies during investigations or system failures. Every duplicate requires 2 approvals. Adrian turned the page. One approval belonged to a security technician. The second belonged to Silas. When 2 days before the treaty was found in Laurel's room. Nolan felt the answer before Adrian said anything else. Find a technician. They located Owen Mercer in a records annex before midnight. He was pale when brought into the interview room, but Nolan kept his voice controlled. Why did you duplicate Laurel Bennett's seal? Owen looked toward Adrian. The chancellor said there was a security test. Did you know the seal would be used? No. I created it and delivered it to his office. Did Silas tell you whose seal it was? Owen hesitated. Yes. Adrian placed the medical wing register on the table. Did you also receive instructions concerning this record? Owen's face changed. I was told to mark it pending verification. Nolan leaned forward. Before Laurel's hearing? Yes. So Silas knew she had an alibi. Owen swallowed. He had the register on his desk. The room became painfully quiet. Nolan remembered Laurel beneath the North Tower archway, asking him to look at her. The evidence that could have kept that door open had already existed. Silas had seen it. Why was it excluded? Nolan asked. The chancellor said the council needed a clean evidentiary packet. Adrian stared at him. Meaning? Nothing that created unnecessary doubt. Nolan stood. He could no longer pretend this was administrative misconduct. What about the second treaty leak? Owen looked confused. I do not know anything about that. Adrian did. An hour later, he traced the transmission through a diplomatic relay authorized by royal security. The approval code belonged to Silas's private office. The leak, sent 36 hours after Laurel entered North Tower, had never demonstrated an accomplice. It had been manufactured to keep suspicion alive while she could not defend herself. Nolan returned to his office shortly before 2 in the morning. Silas was waiting beside the fireplace. You removed my access to Crown records, the chancellor said. Temporarily. On the word of frightened employees and an Omega who fled the capital. Nolan's expression hardened. She did not flee. A magistrate released an innocent woman. Silas gave a thin smile. Innocent is a generous interpretation. Nolan placed the duplicate seal authorization before him, then the medical register, then the relay record. Silas looked at each without touching them. You knew, Nolan said. Silas remained silent. Before I rejected her, before I ordered detention, you knew Laurel could not have entered that archive. I knew she was becoming dangerous. Nolan stared at him. Because she found your medical accounts. Because she did not understand what stability costs. 17 missing supply cases in Cedar Hollow alone. Numbers. Medicine. Nolan's voice dropped. For people who needed it. Silas finally lost the softness in his expression. And what do you imagine happens when an Omega begins accusing senior officials weeks before becoming Luna? Half the council feared what she would do with influence. So you framed her. I gave the council a problem it already wanted solved. Nolan felt sick at the calmness of the admission. You used me. Silas met his eyes. I trusted you to behave like a king. Nolan thought of the door closing. He had believed that command proved strength. Now he understood Silas had counted on exactly that belief. Preserve every record connected to Crowell, Nolan told Adrian when he entered behind him. Freeze his administrative authority pending judicial review. Silas turned sharply. Nolan did not raise his voice. And send independent auditors to every clinic Laurel named. Silas looked at him with something close to contempt. You think finding her will undo this? Nolan closed his hand around the silver pendant in his pocket. No, that was the part Silas still did not understand. Nolan had finally uncovered why Laurel was chosen. But knowing who built the lie could never erase the fact that he had been the one who believed it. By morning, Silas Crowell had lost his office, his security clearance, and the quiet confidence of a man who believed the palace belonged to him. But Nolan knew removing his authority was not enough. Silas had spent years building connections through offices that rarely appeared in public records. Adrian Pike worked through the night, following contracts, authorization codes, and payments until a larger pattern emerged. The missing medical funds were not the end goal, Adrian said, spreading documents across Nolan's desk. They financed part of it. Part of what? Adrian placed 3 financial transfers beside correspondence from representatives involved in the Winter Treaty. 2 outside intermediaries received payments from companies connected to Silas. Days later, confidential treaty details reached rival brokers. Nolan studied the dates. He was undermining the treaty himself. Yes, and each leak increased pressure on the Security Council to request emergency authority. Nolan leaned back, remembering every warning Silas had delivered with measured concern. Disorder was coming. The Crown needed stronger security powers. Ordinary oversight was too slow. Laurel was dangerous. Every road Silas described had somehow led toward giving Silas more control. He created the threat, Nolan said, then offered himself as the solution. Adrian nodded. There is more. He produced a draft emergency statute prepared almost 6 weeks earlier. It would allow royal security to bypass several independent reviews during treaty crises, including restrictions on archive surveillance, financial investigations, and temporary detention. Nolan stared at the preparation date. This was written before the treaty ledger disappeared. More than a month before, the conspiracy suddenly became brutally simple. Silas had diverted medical money through false contracts. Laurel noticed. He needed her discredited before she exposed the accounts. At the same time, he needed a political crisis large enough to expand his authority. Framing the king's future Luna as a traitor accomplished both. Nolan rose. Where is Silas? Under restricted residence, pending judicial review. Then we finish this properly. The independent magistrates convened that afternoon. Nolan did not ask them to accept his conclusions. Adrian presented the duplicated seal authorization, the suppressed medical wing alibi, the false clinic invoices, the second treaty leak, and the emergency statute drafted before the crisis existed. Owen Mercer gave a sworn statement confirming Silas had personally ordered Laurel's seal duplicated and instructed staff to delay records that created doubt. Then another witness changed everything. A junior security analyst named Claire Donnelly admitted she had questioned the second treaty transmission. Silas had told her to classify it and remove it from the ordinary audit queue. Did he explain why? The magistrate asked. Claire lowered her eyes. He said the kingdom needed the Laurel Bennett narrative to remain intact until emergency powers passed. Nolan felt the words settle over the chamber. Not suspicion, not political misjudgment. A narrative. Laurel's guilt had been a story Silas needed everyone to believe. After the hearing, Nolan entered the adjoining room where Silas waited with 2 court officers. You should have listened to me, Silas said. Nolan stopped several feet away. I did. That was the problem. Silas almost smiled. You think 1 Omega matters more than the stability of West Haven? This stopped being about Laurel alone the moment you stole from clinics and manufactured a crisis. Kings survive because men like me make difficult choices. Nolan's expression hardened. Do not call corruption sacrifice. Silas stepped closer to the permitted boundary. You still ordered the tower closed. Nolan did not flinch. Yes. Silas seemed surprised. You expected me to deny it? Nolan continued. You forged the evidence. You hid her alibi. You used prejudice against her. But I rejected Laurel. I authorized her detention. That responsibility belongs to me. The satisfaction disappeared from Silas's face. Nolan turned to the court officers. The magistrates have found sufficient cause for formal charges and continued lawful custody. From this moment, Chancellor Crowell holds no authority over royal security or crown records. Silas's royal insignia was surrendered into court custody. His titles and honors would remain suspended pending tribunal judgment, and his financial accounts connected to the investigation were frozen. Nolan watched without triumph. Justice for Silas would come through the tribunal. Repairing what Nolan had done would be harder. Outside, Adrian approached carrying a small folder. We found Laurel. Nolan's breath caught. Where? Cedar Hollow. About 180 miles west. She started working at the community clinic yesterday. The same clinic whose missing supplies had begun everything. Nolan looked toward the palace gates. Prepare a car. Adrian hesitated. Are you bringing her back? Nolan touched the silver pendant still inside his pocket. No, he finally understood the difference. I am going to ask whether she is willing to speak to me. Laurel saw Nolan through the clinic window before he reached the front door. For one strange second, neither of them moved. Cedar Hollow was nothing like West Haven. There were no marble halls, no royal banners, no officers waiting for commands. Just a modest brick clinic beside a Tulane road, bare winter trees, and boxes of medical supplies stacked near the reception desk. Laurel returned to the inventory sheet in her hands. When the door opened, Nolan entered alone. Laurel. She marked one final number before looking up. You found me. Adrian did. Of course he did. Nolan glanced at the supply boxes. Several carried replacement labels from the Crown Medical Distribution Office. The missing shipments arrived? Some of them. 27 cases this morning. There will be more. Laurel studied him. Is that why you drove 180 miles? No. Nolan reached into his coat, but stopped before removing anything. Silas is in lawful custody. The magistrates found sufficient evidence for formal charges. Laurel showed no surprise. You know what he did? Most of it. Then say it. Nolan understood. He duplicated your seal. He planted the treaty evidence. He withheld your medical wing alibi. He arranged the second leak while you were imprisoned. He diverted clinic funds and used the treaty crisis to push for emergency authority. Laurel's fingers tightened slightly around the inventory sheet. And he knew I was innocent. Yes. Before the tower? Nolan swallowed. Yes. She looked toward the shelves behind him. I knew someone had framed me. I did not know how much of it was Silas. I should have known. You should have listened. Nolan accepted the correction. Yes. Laurel finally set the paper down. Why are you here? I came to tell you the tribunal will need testimony about the medical accounts and what Silas offered you before your detention. I can give a written statement. You can. Nolan paused. But I also came because I owe you something that cannot fit into a statement. Laurel waited. I was wrong. His voice was quieter now. Not because Silas fooled me. He did. But that does not excuse what I chose. I let evidence I had not independently tested become more important than the person standing in front of me. Laurel's expression remained guarded. You rejected me in a room full of people who already believed an Omega did not belong beside you. I know. Then you locked me away. I know. And now you know the truth. Yes. Laurel looked directly at him. I knew the truth while I was locked inside your tower. Nolan had no answer. She stepped around. The desk. Do you know what the strangest part was? Every night I heard that lock turn, and I kept thinking you would come back after asking one more question. Then I realized I was waiting for the man who put me there to rescue me from what he had done. Nolan lowered his eyes. Laurel, I want to bring you home. Her face changed immediately. No, I did not mean to command you. That is the problem, Nolan. You still think home is somewhere you can bring me. He went silent. Laurel moved toward the clinic door and opened it, letting cold mountain air enter the room. The magistrate released me from North Tower. But you cannot release me twice. The court opened the first door. She looked outside at Cedar Hollow, at the clinic that had offered her work without asking whether a king still wanted her. I opened the second. Nolan felt the silver pendant inside his coat and understood why returning it would mean nothing now. Then I will not ask you to come back for me. Laurel looked at him. What are you asking? Come to West Haven for the tribunal. Tell them what you found. Tell them what Silas offered you. Help make sure he cannot do this to anyone else. For justice. For justice. Not because you want your future Luna standing beside you again. Nolan held her gaze. Not unless she chooses that for herself. Something in Laurel's expression softened, but only slightly. I will testify. Nolan exhaled. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. She reached for her coat. I am returning to West Haven to help put Silas Crowell before the truth. Then she stepped through the open doorway. Not to return to you. Laurel returned to West Haven through the same palace gates she had once believed she would never see again. But this time no officer walked beside her, and no royal order decided where she would go. Nolan waited inside the tribunal chamber with Adrian Pike and Dr. Miriam Cole. He did not approach Laurel when she entered. He simply stood, and when their eyes met, he gave a small nod. The hearing began shortly after 10. Adrian presented the duplicated access seal authorization first. Then came the altered archive timestamp. The medical wing register Silas had deliberately withheld, the false clinic invoices, and the transmission record proving the second treaty leak had originated through royal security while Laurel was locked inside North Tower. Owen Mercer testified that Silas personally authorized the duplicate seal. Claire Donnelly confirmed Silas had ordered the second transmission removed from ordinary review because he needed what he called the Laurel Bennett narrative to remain intact. Then Laurel was called. She walked to the witness table without looking at Nolan. 3 days before my detention, she said, I discovered that Cedar Hollow Clinic had received 23 medical supply cases, although Crown records claimed 40 had been delivered. I requested an audit. Chancellor Crowell asked me to withdraw it. The presiding magistrate leaned forward. What happened when you refused? He offered leniency if I confessed to mishandling treaty records. A murmur moved through the chamber. Silas sat across the room beside his legal counsel, stripped of the insignia he had worn for years. That conversation never occurred, he said. Laurel finally looked at him. Then you will have difficulty explaining why your private calendar records a 12-minute meeting with me outside the council chamber. Adrian placed the preserved calendar entry before the magistrates. Silas's expression tightened. Laurel continued. You did not choose me because I betrayed West Haven. You chose me because I noticed 17 missing boxes. Silas gave a cold laugh. You imagine this kingdom nearly collapsed over clinic inventory? No. I think your scheme nearly collapsed because an Omega learned how to read your numbers. Silence followed. Silas turned toward Nolan. Your Majesty, everything I did preserved the crown from instability. Nolan rose slowly. You stole from communities that trusted this government. You manufactured evidence against an innocent woman. You undermined a treaty so you could demand greater authority. And you believed me, Silas replied. Every face turned toward the king. Nolan did not retreat from the accusation. Yes. Laurel looked at him for the first time since her testimony began. You forged the evidence, Nolan continued. You planted the lie. But I ordered the door locked. His voice carried through the chamber. West Haven deserves the whole truth, including the part that belongs to me. By late afternoon, the tribunal found sufficient evidence to proceed on charges of conspiracy, fraud, bribery, falsification of crown records, diversion of public funds, obstruction of justice, and abuse of office. Silas remained in lawful custody pending final judgment. His royal honors were formally suspended, his chancellor title revoked, his access to government permanently terminated pending statutory disqualification, and assets connected to the corruption network remained frozen for restitution proceedings. Officials who knowingly participated were referred for separate prosecution. Nolan then placed Laurel's rejection decree before the magistrates. This record was created from a false accusation, he said. I request that it be voided. Laurel's expression hardened until Nolan added, not to restore any claim over her, to remove a judgment that should never have existed. The decree was nullified. Then Nolan submitted one final request, an independent review of his own decision to authorize Laurel's detention. Laurel stared at him. Why? She asked when the chamber had nearly emptied. Nolan looked toward the doors. Because Silas being guilty does not make me innocent of failing you. Laurel said nothing for several seconds. Then she walked toward the exit. Nolan did not follow. At the doorway, she stopped and looked back. The clinic still needs the 17 cases Silas stole. Nolan nodded. They will receive them. Not as a royal gift. No, as restitution. Something quiet passed across Laurel's face. She opened the door herself. This time, no one stood on the other side waiting to close it behind her. 3 months later, the front door of Cedar Hollow Clinic stood open to a mild spring evening when Nolan Ashford arrived alone. Laurel noticed him from behind the reception desk, but she finished signing a delivery receipt before looking up. 20 crates of medical supplies lined the hallway behind her. More had already been distributed to neighboring clinics. None carried a royal donation seal. Every box had been purchased through the restitution fund created from assets recovered during the Crowell investigation. You are late, Laurel said. Nolan glanced at the clock. You were expecting me? Adrian said you might come after the tribunal issued its final judgment. Nolan stepped inside but remained near the entrance. Silas was convicted this morning. Laurel set down her pen. All charges. Conspiracy, fraud, bribery, falsification of crown records, diversion of public funds, obstruction of justice, and abuse of office. Sentence. Lengthy imprisonment. Permanent disqualification from public authority. His chancellor title and royal honors are permanently revoked. Assets proven to come from corruption have been forfeited, and the restitution process will continue until every affected clinic is accounted for. Laurel looked toward the supply crates. And the others? Officials who knowingly participated are being prosecuted according to their involvement. Those who cooperated without understanding the scheme are being reviewed separately. Nolan paused. There will be no blanket punishment simply because someone worked under him. Laurel nodded slowly. Good. There is more. The detention review finished last week. Nolan removed a folded document from his coat, but did not hand it to her. The commission found that your detention met the old emergency standard because I authorized it. But that standard was fundamentally unsafe. One security office could collect evidence, control what the Crown saw, and recommend detention without independent verification. Laurel's expression became distant. I remember. It cannot happen again. Nolan explained that West Haven had adopted independent evidence review before royal detention, mandatory disclosure of material that could establish innocence, and separate oversight whenever royal security was involved in an investigation. No office could create evidence, investigate it, and control the recommendation that followed. And the king? Laurel asked. Nolan understood what she meant. The king is no longer exempt from review. That answer held her. Attention. You agreed to that? I requested it. Silence settled between them. Outside, evening light stretched across Cedar Hollow's quiet main road. Nolan reached into his coat again and removed the silver pendant Laurel had left in North Tower. I have carried this since the day you left. Laurel looked at it, but made no move to take it. I did not bring it because I expect you to wear it again. Then why? Because it belongs to you, and I finally understand that giving something back is different from asking for something in return. He placed the pendant on the reception desk. Laurel touched the chain with one finger. You have changed. Nolan did not smile. I am trying to. That is not the same thing. No, she looked at him. 3 months ago, you would have argued with me. 3 months ago, I thought being king meant having the final answer. A faint smile touched Laurel's face. That sounds exhausting. It was. For the first time, they both laughed, softly and briefly. Nolan looked toward the open door. I should leave. Laurel did not stop him. He stepped outside, then turned back. You should lock that after I go. It is getting late. Laurel looked at the doorway. Once, Nolan had stood outside another door while she stood inside, and one command from him had closed it between them. Neither needed to mention North Tower now. I know, she said. Nolan nodded and started toward his car. Nolan. He stopped. Laurel remained beside the open door. You can stay for coffee. Surprise crossed his face. Are you sure? I am not asking you to stay forever. He waited. Laurel looked at the door, then back at the man who had once believed love gave him the right to decide what happened to her. I am choosing not to close the door tonight. Nolan returned slowly, careful not to mistake an invitation for forgiveness. Laurel stepped aside because she wanted to, not because a crown required it. The door remained open behind them as evening settled over Cedar Hollow. Silas had lost the power he abused. West Haven had changed the laws that allowed his deception to succeed. Nolan had learned that regret could not unlock yesterday, and Laurel had learned she never needed a king to give her freedom. The first time that door closed, Nolan made the choice. This time, the choice belonged entirely to her.